This is TWiT.
So I got one for you, Stacey and Leo. I think it's an interesting question. So now you have various parties going strong after the platform saying that they should eliminate the dens where anti-vaxxers breed.
That is a really interesting question.
So is that the job? Is that the job of Facebook? God knows it's misinformation. God knows it's harmful.
Basically, is it like shouting fire in a crowded theater? Except, is it like shouting fire in a closed loop system?
Especially since we're having measles outbreaks in the Northwest.
Exactly. So these are horrid.
People are actually
ignorant people.
Kids are getting sick. Some are dying because of this.
But is it Facebook's job to do that?
Wow, I'd say no.
Stacey?
I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about this.
Why? That takes all the fun out of it, Stacey. What do you think first? Jeez,
we need hot takes, Stacey. Hot takes.
Exactly.
Silly me, trying to get a considered opinion here.
On that.
I know. Okay, so I'm thinking about it from a public health standpoint. It is obviously detrimental to have these closed groups, and it is easier to share them and spread them. It's unlike in physical meetings, so it's much easier. So is it closer to basically shouting fire in a crowded theater is the question we'd have to come up with. Does that make sense? Because that would be the argument that I would use if I said you should shut it down.
And that line refers back to, I don't know if it was Felix Frankfurter, a Supreme Court decision about free speech that limited free speech only to cases where it doesn't. It's all right to abridge free speech in a case where it endangers lives.
Right.
And the example he gave was shouting fire in a crowded theater. So
thank you, Leo.
If it endangered, well, maybe I didn't even need to give you that gloss, but just.
No, that was hell. I was like, I did not have the reference point in front of me to explain all of that. So go you with doing it.
Yeah.
So that is the question: is it that big of an endangerment for public welfare?
That was Justice Holmes. I apologize. Let's give him credit.
So yes. So that's what I'm trying to think through, Jeff. And I don't.
So here's Stacey. What I think, if you're Facebook and you face something similar in the Czech Republic, right? What you're going to hope to say is, government, you tell me what to do. If it's against the law, I'll do it. If it's not, I'm leaving it, right? Because that's what we do. That's our policy here. So in essence, but we don't want the government, I think, to outlaw even the First Amendment protects lies. The First Amendment protects mistakes. First Amendment protects bad speech.
Actually, and I'm reading an article, it does not. According to the Washington Post, knowingly false statements of fact are often constitutionally unprotected.
In instances of
libel, fraud, perjury,
right, where there is other law.
Or Oliver Wendell Holmes saying the most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely, that's the important word there, shouting fire in a theater and causing panic.
Yeah. So
falsely is important. If it's false and it causes harm, it may not be constitutionally protected.
But then we end up in a case where, do we want Facebook and Twitter to decide what's false and true? Do we want them to pre-moderate everything that we all want to say? 11 and 13 were bad. This is worse in a lot of ways.
Okay, so I'm not arguing one way or the other.
I think the anti-vaxxers are awful, but I don't know what to do.
Here's maybe a way out of it, or maybe a thing that could happen. Let's say my child gets the measles and as a result of it is deaf for the rest of her life, and she was hearing. And I view that as a harm. I could actually go after Facebook if I could, because that is a tort situation where I could demonstrate harm. If I could demonstrate it directly back to that group, like let's say my best friend didn't vaccinate their child, that's who I got it from, and it was because of that group, and I could find enough other people, you could get a class action or you could get a significant enough lawsuit that Facebook would then have to act to protect its own economic interests to avoid getting sued for something like that, right? I could say that it is a place that coddled that group or made it possible for my child to get this disease that harmed her, and thus I'm suing. So that's one way we could go after it without government technically going after it, but the government would be, as part of the lawsuit, we would be invoking the laws of this country, if that makes sense.
Incidentally, I'm really going down this rabbit hole. There does seem to be quite an important distinction between deliberately lying and unknowingly lying.
Yes.
And this goes back to the very famous stolen valor case of 2012. It's actually, this is fast. I would hate being a lawyer, but I love the law. This is a case where a guy had a habit of lying. He said he played hockey for the Detroit Red Wings. He married a starlet from Mexico. But when he announced he had falsely held the Congressional Medal of Honor, he violated a federal criminal statute, the Stolen Valor Act of 2005. And the knowingly is the key here. That he. What was the final decision? That's the question. I have to read this whole thing to find out what the court held on this. Do you know, Karsten? You went to Harvard.
You actually read things unlike us.
Was it Harvard Law School?
No, but I figure Harvard's Harvard, right?
If he went to Harvard Law School, would he be working with us? He'd be rich, I tell you.
The judgment of the court is affirmed. The nation well knows, this is Justice Roberts writing, this is only in 2012, the nation well knows that one of the costs of the First Amendment is that it protects the speech we detest as well as the speech we embrace. Though few might find the respondent's statements anything but contemptible, his right to make these statements is protected by the Constitution's guarantee of freedom of speech and protection. The Stolen Valor Act infringes upon free speech. It's overturned.
What's interesting about this, I'm going to give you another law case right now.
They did not prove harm.
They did not prove harm? Is that why?
Yes.
Okay.
That should be the theme of this show, all the proving of harm.
Yeah, well, that's a very important legal standard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's you can't say, well, it's just wrong. You have to show harm.
You can't say it could happen.
Right.
So I'm going to say this is related to.
Did you know that off the top of your head, Karsten?
I Googled very quickly.
Okay, I was going to be very impressed.
If you were in France, you'd still be asking what happened because you couldn't get to Google.
Qu'est-ce que se passe?
In the case of the Bezos National Enquirer, a fair number of legal pundits on the air were saying, well, I don't know if you can actually charge bribery and extortion in this case because they didn't ask for money. So one of the great things about being in a green room at MSNBC is I get to ask the lawyers their questions. So Chuck Rosenberg, who I think is phenomenal, and I said, explain this to me, counselor. And he's a former U.S. attorney prosecutor. And he said, well, actually, the problem is that the bribery extortion definition of value, stealing value, is limited. But he said in the stealing government property statute, there's a broader definition of value, and it includes intangible things. So by seeking to get Jeff Bezos to give up the journalistic value of the Washington Post, was AMI trying to extort value out of him.
Interesting.
Right, which is really, so it's the same as stolen valor in a way, that notion of stealing valor right, and thus value. I mean, you're right. I'm glad I was going to go to law school too. I'm very glad I didn't. I would have a real tough time saying yes, Your Honor. It would not work well. I'd be under contempt all the time. Yeah.
I'm warning you, Mr. Jarvis. One more outburst in this court.